Hello everyone, my name is Roosevelt Elias, founder of MyPayble, and my session today I'm going to talk about the criticality in considering government policies, privacy policies and cybersecurity while building technology for rural Africa. And this is particularly a passionate topic for me simply because I'm in the space and I truly believe that Africa is a utopia and it is going to be a cradle of the world in the near future, and we all need to collectively make sure that we build world-class products coming out from Africa by Africans for Africans. And so to get into this topic, we're going to first of all going to get us familiar with the landscape, understanding what it actually means for when we're bidding for rural Africa. There are things to consider. The first thing off the top of my head would be the economic disparity. We have a lot of Africans living below the poverty line, even while we also have some that are for African standard, are on the poverty line or a bit higher. But majority of what's built today, it doesn't really consider the smaller players, and these are technology is really meant to change and uplift, but it doesn't even reach them simply because of economic disparity. Sometimes they just simply cannot afford to actually access technology. Then the next thing to think about is the literacy gap. Even when they can access the technology, they would usually not have the education good enough to or background that allows them explore it. So this is also a gap in the market. So in the sense that if you take a product, let's say like ChatGPT, a guy in Jigawa would probably struggle to actually understand what he's meant to be using it for, or what he's meant to be doing. Or take a product like the Oculus or something, and that's because the people who are doing technologies like this aren't building for Africans, or for should I say, for people thinking of those people while they build. They're thinking about people like me and you, or even people from where they are. So there's always something I say amongst my friends, that the world is building, but nobody's building for Africa. Only Africans can and should build for Africa. So we should make sure that this is how we do it. So yes, we consider the literacy gap. And then there's just the general infrastructure limitations, right? Things like simple internet connections that are stable and cheap. Once again, the internet in Africa is not exactly cheap. So, but everything runs on the internet these days. And with all of these things being considered, I would really like us to just dive into the topic real quick. I hope you enjoyed this session. Let's talk about government policies. I think the first question would be should the policies become more lenient, or should there be a lot more guide that allows innovators actually build well while staying with policies? And this is a question I think is open for debate, not just right now, but for anyone who cares to pick it up. Because, for example, you're an innovator who wants to provide a technological solution that allows Africans access stocks that aren't African, or even on the NGX. So now you have to deal with some financial regulations, SEC and all of that. But how do you even know where to start from? Let's say you do not have a background in that, but you have a passion in stock trading, for example, and you want to make it available to Africans. How do you navigate it? How do you build for example, Africa, and you can go live easily in Kenya? How do we what is the compliance shift? What does it mean? So for example, if you build in the UK, it's almost very easy for you to actually launch across the EU. So that's more than 20 to 25 markets that are easily open for you just because you've been able to meet just one compliance. How do we actually make this possible? So this, I think this becomes a thing where it's a bit more higher level, where the government becomes a platform. And I do think we need more people to lobby into these places to make these things easy. So for example, Flutterwave shouldn't have to have 50 licenses to deal in Africa, because I don't think it's even an achievement for you to say, oh, we have X amount of licenses to do the same services in the same continent. It's easier for you to send money to the US or the UK or EU than it is for you to send money to Gabon. Most people don't even know what Gabon is. So I think that's, first of all, breaking down the barriers across Africa, first of all, financially and compliance-wise, where Paystack, a company like Paystack or a young company like VZ can easily work in any country and in Africa, and we're able to fully access the over 1.2 billion people that are in and from our continent without barrier. And that's a market on its own. It's the same way we find unicorn startups in China that nobody outside China hears of, but they're a unicorn simply because their market is big enough. And that's something that Africa has the potential for. So that's one. But how do you build for this? Once again, it starts becoming cumbersome. Do we start having aggregator agencies that actually provide out of the box compliance as a service? Is this something to be built for? Then there's the legal. What are the legal libraries that founders who are bootstrapping can take advantage of, rather than looking for lawyers that will charge you top dollar for their consultations? Because you should be spending your capital building your product, not actually paying someone on a daily basis. But then again, it's also important to have legal at your side at all times, as well as accounting. So these are some of the compliance issues to deal with. Okay, who do you go? How do you start it? Some of these compliance that you need to do, you need to meet someone. There is no internet knowledge base for these things. Who is building for that? And I think all of these are some of the things that we can navigate and actually come together and talk on, and not just talk, act on. So for example, if you want to start a bank, do you need to make sure that you have a capital, or are there ways to start a bank without actually flagging compliance with the CBN? Are there ways to start a cross-border payments company without actually having to flag? Sometimes we have to actually think about the fact and ask what were the compliance breaches that Binance actually breached that the company, because Binance couldn't sort out. So I think that's in Nigeria, for example. And I think these are some of the things to actually think and talk about when it comes to government and compliance. And that same umbrella covers privacy policy. What are the set rules for the NDPR? How do we access those rules? What do they mean? Who's simplifying these things for us? What's the barrier to entry for innovators as well, who might not necessarily have all the capital to actually consult professionals? How are they able to make their own research and make it right in simple terms? And I think some of these questions I'm asking, we can actually take our way out of. So that's something to actually think about. Now, let's talk about privacy policy. This is another thing that I feel like is grossly overlooked in Africa as well, especially amongst technology innovators, because we just want to build product and actually mine data. And some people don't even care about data, so they just want to build products and put it out there. We recently had an issue on social media. I don't know how far that went with a company that people had accounts with that they didn't know they even had accounts with. So the question kept popping in my head, like, was it deliberate? Who checkmates this? And now let's now say you're a technological company that have built, for example, for Nigeria. What are the privacy policy laws across Africa? Because we have about 50 countries or so, and if you had to go live in all of those countries, what's the difference in what you have to meet? Because once again, with an example of the EU, the privacy policy, the GDPR laws cut across the markets. So that's a vast array of market that you can access with just one compliance switch. So are there startups that are covering this and building well? Because even from a personal experience, we struggled with ID verification, for example, with some of the companies that we've worked with, and sometimes the products just don't work. And you would find that it is a technological issue or a lack of understanding of the market, because sometimes you get into gross violation of privacy policies. How do we navigate these things? And I think truly it's more about transparency and data handling, and as well as collecting as minimal data as possible. And it's topics like this that actually strike the conversation that we're having right now. Well, not really a conversation, but where, okay, how much data is minimal enough to pass government regulatory compliance while also keeping privacy? So I'm going to use fintech, for example, where the CBN requires you to collect NIN and BVN while opening a bank account or a financial service for a small business or for an individual. So now with that, what else do I need to be collecting? Do I need to be collecting photo IDs? How do I store them? How do we warehouse these things? Because sometimes we have some of those things, but we don't even have the good enough infrastructure to actually store them in Africa. So once again, these are things that we could be building for, and it still circles back to having to work with the government to become a platform for us to actually thrive. So once again, this is a huge question that I'm going to also leave with a big question mark behind. How do we handle that? How do you gather user consent? How well does the user even understand privacy and what they're consenting to? How well are they able to manage it? Are technological companies actually providing the options for this? And yeah, these are some of the things, like sometimes how do they opt out or modify their preferences? How are you sorting out preferencing? How are you are there legal bodies or legal data banks online that can be used that are specific to Africa? How quick does this change the moment you try to leave? You try to launch in Ghana or in Zimbabwe? What are the differences in all of this? What do you have to deal with? Once again, it comes to the question of borders. So, and I think these are critical questions that need to be asked and navigated. And it's a thing where I don't think there's a real answer yet. There's no concrete answer yet, because we still have, for example, companies that struggle to actually launch in more than 5 countries in Africa, but meanwhile it's easier for them to spread to countries like China or the UK or the US. But going from Nigeria to the Congo is even a problem, and it shouldn't be a problem at all. And finally, I'm going to end the talk today with cybersecurity and promoting technology amongst rural Africa. I genuinely think most companies who are coming out today do not really consider cybersecurity while they build. The standards of encryptions for some companies would not pass the slightest litmus test when it comes to pen testing. And I do think it is usually because of the lack of awareness of what they need to be building. And sometimes as innovators, and even just Africans, we tend to downplay Africa. And so we want to provide haphazard products. I do not think that that's the way to build for a utopia that would essentially lead a move in the future to come. And cybersecurity in itself is a multifaceted thing to consider. You first of all have to think about fraud prevention and detection, which means you have to have a lot of encryptions and machine learning and models running on your products. I can understand that some of these things could be expensive, but I actually think this is the one that is not a compliance issue or an infrastructure issue. I think it's a technology issue, and I think as innovators, we actually should pay more attention to this. And then there's another part where you consider security for user data. So the initial things I had spoken about, which is data for privacy policies and stuff like that. How do you protect them? I do think we still need more on ground infrastructures that allows the protection for user data across products in Africa. And then user education. I do think a lot of Africans still lack user education in the sense of being quite porous with their personal information. And I do think as business owners and companies, it's our responsibility to actually run the drive for this awareness. Things like password hygiene and to be able to recognize phishing. But time has actually taught Africans, for at least in Nigeria, that okay, things like your card PIN should be kept secret. And I think the banks have done a great job in that. But now that with the advent of fintechs and mobile technologies that you can access right from your home, we also need to hammer more on that. And then we're going to talk about promoting access to technology. I truly think the easiest way to actually promote access to technology is 1, educating the users of the technology. 2, actually building cheap, affordable hardware and softwares that are cheap and easy for our citizens and people to actually access. But while I use the word cheap, do not mistake it for low quality. I truly think we need to build truly high quality products with a ridiculously low ball for access. Companies like MoneyPoint are winning on that, even though it's costing them a premium, but it is worth it. So in conclusion, I truly think collaboration across private, government, corporates, and startups is very important across the continent for us to truly drive an African utopia. And as technologists and innovators, this is something we need to also work on while writing code or building a product. Thank you.
For more on well-researched and balanced stories, events, and interviews across business, tech innovation, and lifestyle, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel, www.youtube.com/digivationnetwork.